The most disappointing thing about the UFO files is not what they hide, but what they still cannot prove. For decades, the promise was simple. Somewhere behind a locked door, inside a military archive, beneath layers of classification markings and blacked-out pages, there was supposed to be an answer. Not another rumor, not another shaky light above a highway, not another late-night witness account cut into a television special. An answer. Something hard enough to end the argument. Something clear enough to make the laughter stop. Something undeniable enough to tell the world that the old suspicion had been right all along. The files were supposed to do what the sky never could. They were supposed to hold still. They were supposed to give the strange lights a name, the blurred shapes a history, the pilot reports a physical body. They were supposed to turn mystery into proof, and for a brief moment, when official pages began to open and old material moved from secrecy into public view, it felt as if the whole story might finally break open. A file release does not sound romantic until the subject is UFOs. Then a scanned page becomes a doorway, a case number becomes a signal, a redaction becomes a wound. A video clip becomes a possible crack in the wall between ordinary life and the hidden universe people have imagined for generations. People did not arrive at those files as neutral readers. They arrived with years of suspicion already burning in them. They carried Roswell, Area 51, Cold War silence, strange lights over military bases, pilots describing things they could not explain, former officials speaking in careful phrases, witnesses asking why no one listened, and a culture trained by film and rumor to expect that the government always knows more than it says. So when the files appeared, the public did not simply see documents. It saw a door, and the door was supposed to lead to aliens, but the door opened onto something much colder. A report missing crucial context. A video without enough metadata. A pilot account that may be sincere but incomplete. A sensor record that shows something unusual but cannot establish origin. A page where the most important fact is not the dramatic phrase in the middle, but the uncertainty around it. A case that remains unresolved not because it clearly exceeds human technology, but because the evidence chain is too weak to close. That is the cruel center of the modern UAP story. The files did not prove aliens, they proved how difficult proof actually is. That is a much less satisfying revelation. It has no glowing craft under white laboratory lights, no sealed hangar, no biological specimen, no recovered engine, no official confession that changes human history overnight. It does not give the audience the scene it has rehearsed for decades. It gives something more uncomfortable. The realization that a mystery can survive without becoming extraordinary. A thing can be unidentified because it is strange. A thing can also be unidentified because the camera was poor, the sensor was limited, the distance was unknown, the object was too small, the moment was too brief, the weather was unhelpful, the data were not preserved, the military context remains classified, or the case was never collected in a way that could support a strong conclusion. The word unidentified sounds powerful. But it is not a synonym for extraterrestrial. That sentence should be obvious. Yet it is the sentence that disappears every time a new clip or document enters the public bloodstream. Unidentified does not mean alien. It means the available evidence has not produced a reliable identification. It is a statement about the limits of the record, not a passport from another world. The mind hates that distinction because it feels like a downgrade. It takes a story that could have been cosmic and pushes it back into the mud of measurement. It asks for range, altitude, calibration, raw data, sensor mode, weather, timing, chain of custody, independent corroboration. It asks whether the object was seen by multiple systems, whether those systems agreed, whether ordinary explanations were actually ruled out, whether the apparent motion belongs to the object or to the camera, whether the footage has been compressed, cropped, stabilized, or stripped of context. Those questions feel small beside the size of the fantasy. But those questions are where truth lives. The hearing room became the perfect stage for this collision. Flat light, dark suits, microphones, nameplates, cameras aimed at faces that seem to know the public is waiting for one forbidden sentence. A witness pauses before answering. A lawmaker leans forward. The room carries the strange pressure of a courtroom, a theater, and a confession booth. Every careful phrase becomes suspicious. Every refusal to elaborate becomes meaningful. Every classified answer seems to vibrate with hidden importance. The public watches these hearings differently from ordinary politics. It is not waiting for budget language or procedural detail. It is waiting for the admission. The sentence that says the objects were real, they were not ours, and the truth had been kept behind locked doors. And that expectation changes everything. It makes cautious language feel like evasion. It makes redactions feel like evidence. It makes uncertainty feel deliberate. It turns bureaucracy into drama. But drama is not proof. A hearing can expose oversight problems. It can pressure agencies. It can raise questions about classification, reporting channels, retaliation, and what officials know. It can make the subject harder to dismiss. It can give pilots and witnesses a serious public platform. But a hearing is not a laboratory. A sworn statement is not a material sample. A claim about hidden programs is not the same thing as verified physical evidence. A serious face does not transform uncertainty into origin. This is where the public splits. Some people hear testimony and feel history arriving. Others hear testimony and ask for names, dates, locations, chain of custody, direct witnesses, raw data, physical material, independent analysis. One side feels the story, the other asks whether the story can survive evidence. Both instincts come from something real. People have reasons to distrust institutions. Governments have lied before. Military and intelligence systems classify aggressively. Official denials have not always aged well. Pilots and other observers have often been ridiculed or ignored. Public frustration did not appear from nowhere. But distrust is not a method. Distrust can open a door to inquiry. It cannot replace inquiry. If agencies have withheld UAP-related information improperly, the public should demand oversight. If pilots were discouraged from reporting, that culture should change. If data collection has been sloppy, that is a serious problem. If sensitive airspace is being entered by unknown drones or platforms, that matters. If classification prevents meaningful scientific review, that deserves pressure. None of that proves alien spacecraft. Secrecy is not origin. A file can be classified because it reveals sensor capability, aircraft position, military procedure, intelligence methods, locations, names, communications, or embarrassing uncertainty. It can be classified because bureaucracies hide too much by habit. It can be classified because no one wants to expose a vulnerability. It can be classified because the event involved a human system that officials do not want to discuss. It can be classified because the record is incomplete, and no one wants to speak too strongly. The existence of a locked room does not tell you what is inside the room. But the UFO imagination has spent decades learning to fill locked rooms with aliens. That is why redacted documents have such power. A black bar is supposed to remove information. In UFO culture, it often adds drama. The missing words become louder than the visible ones. The blank space becomes a screen. People project the answer they already suspect into the place where the government has withheld text. The redaction becomes a character. It stands there like a witness refusing to speak. But redaction is not evidence of extraterrestrial technology. It is evidence that something has been withheld. Those are different statements. The withheld material may be sensitive. It may be mundane. It may involve names, locations, methods, aircraft, systems, or mistakes. It may even be improperly hidden. The public can demand accountability for that. But accountability is not alien proof. The same problem appears in the footage. A blurry object in a random online upload may be dismissed within seconds. A blurry object inside an official archive becomes heavier. The image has not necessarily improved. The measurement has not necessarily changed, but the frame around it has. It now carries the authority of the state. It appears inside a record. It becomes a government mystery. Authority can make weak evidence feel stronger than it is. That is one of the most dangerous forces in the entire UAP conversation. A dot on a screen can feel more important because of where it appears. A brief clip can feel historic because a military sensor recorded it. A pilot's alarm can feel like a scientific conclusion because the witness is trained. A file can feel like proof because it was once hidden. But scientific strength does not come from mood, it comes from evidence quality. A real video can still be ambiguous. An authentic file can still be incomplete. A credible witness can still lack crucial measurements. A serious military context can still contain ordinary misidentification. The government can release something true that still does not support the claim people want to attach to it. This is why the phrase, "the government admitted UFOs are real," can mislead more than it informs. It depends entirely on what UFO means in that sentence. If it means, people have reported things in the sky that were not immediately identified, yes. If it means, every reported object is a structured craft, no. If it means the government has confirmed non-human technology, no. If it means unresolved cases remain, yes. If it means unresolved cases equal aliens, no. The public often compresses all those meanings into one emotional sentence. That compression is where belief enters. A report exists, so something happened, so it was truly anomalous. It was anomalous, so it defied known technology. It defied known technology, so it must be non-human. It is non-human, so the government knows. The government knows, so the files are proof. Every step in that chain needs evidence. Most of the time, the evidence does not carry the chain. A serious investigation has to slow the chain down. It has to ask what the report actually says. It has to ask whether the object's distance is known. It has to ask whether apparent speed was measured or inferred. It has to ask whether the camera or aircraft motion could explain the visual impression. It has to ask whether a known object under unusual conditions could appear unknown. It has to ask whether the raw data exist. It has to ask whether the case has enough information to be more than a question. The subject becomes less exciting at that speed. It also becomes more honest. Much of the modern UAP debate lives inside a painful gap between what a clip feels like and what it proves. A short video can feel extraordinary because the viewer sees motion without context. Something darts across a screen, a shape rotates. A bright object seems to accelerate. A thermal image makes an object glow against darkness. A radar trace appears where it should not be. The footage feels like a violation. But a feeling of violation is not the same as measured violation. The sky is a hard place to understand. Scale is difficult. Distance is difficult. Speed is difficult. At night, over water, against clouds, through sensors, through cockpit glass, or through infrared imagery, the usual cues the brain uses to understand motion can fall apart. A small object close by can look like a large object far away. A slow object can appear fast because the aircraft or camera is moving. A shape can seem to rotate because of glare, focus, or tracking behavior. A point of light can become a craft because the mind wants an object, not an uncertainty. That does not make witnesses foolish. It makes them human. A pilot is a serious observer. A trained aviator has experience, discipline, and attention under pressure. Pilot reports should not be mocked. When people operating aircraft report unknown objects or sensor anomalies, that matters. It may involve safety. It may involve airspace intrusion. It may involve drones, balloons, aircraft, classified platforms, adversary systems, or sensor problems. It deserves a reporting system that does not punish honesty. But a serious witness is not a calibrated instrument. A pilot can accurately report that something appeared strange, and still be unable to establish its true size, speed, distance, or origin. Under pressure, With limited time and incomplete information, perception can be sincere and wrong. That is not an insult. It is a fact about human observation. The strongest witness account still needs data around it. The cockpit does not remove uncertainty. It changes the form uncertainty takes. Instead of a person in a field looking upward, you have a trained person inside a machine, surrounded by sensors, displays, procedures, and stress. That is better than nothing. It is not the same as laboratory-grade evidence. Military sensors are powerful, but they are not magical. Radar systems can produce ambiguous returns. Infrared cameras can distort shape through heat, glare, contrast, focus, atmospheric conditions, and compression. Targeting systems can track something without identifying the object. Displays can be recorded in ways that lose important information. Sensor data can be classified, incomplete, or unavailable for public review. The machine can detect something real and still not tell us what it is. That is not a contradiction. It is the normal condition of imperfect measurement. The presence of a sensor does not automatically resolve a case. A sensor is only as useful as the context around it. What was the range? What was the field of view? What mode was active? What environmental conditions existed? Was the object tracked by another system? Was the raw file preserved? Was there radar correlation? Were there other aircraft or known objects nearby? Without those details, a video may be emotionally powerful and scientifically fragile. Infrared footage is especially seductive because it looks like hidden truth. It seems to strip away ordinary vision and reveal what the eye cannot see. But infrared does not show reality in a pure form. It shows a thermal interpretation shaped by the instrument. Heat, reflection, glare, focus, blooming, contrast, weather and compression can all change what the viewer thinks they are seeing. A glowing object is not automatically exotic. A strange shape is not automatically structured. A rotating appearance is not automatically a rotating craft. Thermal imagery can make ordinary objects look uncanny. Birds, balloons, drones, aircraft, debris, and distant objects can appear strange under the right conditions. An object does not need to break physics to break the viewer's expectations. Radar has its own aura of authority. Numbers feel harder than memory. Tracks feel less subjective than witness accounts. A radar return appears to come from a machine, and machines feel less vulnerable to error. But radar is also a system of interpretation. It can encounter clutter, false tracks, interference, filtering issues, anomalous propagation, and classification uncertainty. Radar data are valuable, but they still need correlation and analysis. A radar return is not an alien signature, it is a clue. Clues require context. This is the heart of the UAP evidence problem. Many of the most dramatic cases are dramatic because the data are incomplete. If the range is unknown, speed can be exaggerated. If the object is a dot, size can be imagined. If raw data are missing, analysis becomes fragile. If only a short clip circulates, the surrounding conditions vanish. If the case remains classified, public evaluation becomes nearly impossible. The uncertainty itself becomes a stage for belief. Bad data do not simply fail to solve the mystery, they keep the mystery alive in a form that cannot be tested. That is why weak evidence can become culturally powerful. A strong explanation ends debate. A weak mystery generates endless debate. If a case is solved as a balloon, it loses its magic. If a case has insufficient data, it can live forever. Every person can project a different answer into it. Every missing measurement becomes room for another theory. Every unshared file becomes another possible vault. The weakest cases can become immortal, because there is not enough evidence to kill them. This is the opposite of science. Science does not preserve mystery for its own sake. It tries to reduce uncertainty. It welcomes better data even if the better data destroy a beautiful idea. It asks what would make a claim fail. It asks which explanation requires the fewest unsupported assumptions. It asks whether the extraordinary interpretation is necessary, not merely exciting. The alien interpretation is rarely necessary, it is often emotionally satisfying. That is different. The idea of aliens gives the story a clean shape, it turns confusion into contact. It turns secrecy into a cover-up, it turns blurry footage into evidence of visitors. It turns witness anxiety into historic testimony. It turns a difficult unknown into a meaningful one. But meaning is not measurement, the universe may be full of life. That possibility is not absurd. Modern astronomy has revealed planets around other stars. Chemistry and biology raise deep questions about how common life may be. The human assumption that Earth is unique may turn out to be wrong. Wonder about life elsewhere is not foolish. It is one of the great scientific questions, but the possible existence of life elsewhere does not identify a UAP in a military file. Those are separate questions. A galaxy full of possible life does not turn a blurry object into a spacecraft. A philosophical argument about cosmic loneliness does not establish the origin of a radar return. The scale of the universe does not replace missing metadata. A big cosmos does not make every unresolved case extraterrestrial. This distinction matters because it lets wonder remain honest. You can believe the universe may contain life and still reject weak alien claims. You can support UAP research and still say the released files did not prove alien technology. You can respect witnesses and still demand measurements. You can distrust government secrecy and still refuse to treat secrecy as proof of non-human craft. That is not contradiction, it is discipline. The modern public conversation often punishes discipline because disciplined language sounds less dramatic. Unresolved due to insufficient data does not travel like. The government cannot explain it. No verified evidence of extraterrestrial technology does not travel like officials admit UFOs are real. Sensor limitation require caution does not travel like military footage shows impossible craft. The simplified version wins attention. The careful version has to fight for oxygen. That is why the release of UAP files became less a scientific event than a cultural test. People saw what they were prepared to see. Believers saw confirmation hidden in caution. Skeptics saw weakness. Conspiracy communities saw another layer of cover. Serious researchers saw a data problem. Journalists saw a headline. Politicians saw oversight, opportunity, or pressure. The same file became many different stories. The evidence itself was often less powerful than the emotional machinery around it. That machinery was built over many years. UFO culture has always been a culture of the almost confirmed, almost disclosed, almost proven, almost admitted, almost revealed. There is always another file, another witness, another hearing, another release, another briefing, another source who says the real proof is just behind the next door. The future tense keeps the mythology alive. Proof is always arriving. Never arrived. The modern file releases challenge that mythology because they brought some material into public view and forced the question, is this enough? For the alien claim, the answer remains no. That does not mean the material is worthless. It may still matter for air safety, reporting standards, sensor analysis, historical transparency, public trust, and national security. It may show that agencies need better systems for collecting and preserving data. It may show that pilots and personnel deserve clearer channels. It may show that the public should have access to more context where security allows. It may show that the sky is full of things people misread, and that some cases deserve more careful study, but worth investigating is not the same as alien. The difference between those phrases is where responsible thinking begins. A drone problem can be serious. A foreign surveillance problem can be serious. A sensor problem can be serious. A reporting stigma problem can be serious. A classification problem can be serious. A public trust problem can be serious. None of those needs extraterrestrials to matter. In fact, the alien obsession can make some practical risks harder to see. If every unknown near a military area becomes a possible spacecraft, the more likely concerns may be pushed aside. Unknown drones, unauthorized platform, spoofing, sensor gaps, and adversary reconnaissance are not glamorous, but they are real problems. National security does not require aliens to be urgent. A skeptical view is not a lazy view. At its best, skepticism keeps the risk in focus. The opposite of conspiracy is not mockery. It is careful attention. It says pilots should report. It says cases should be investigated. It says data should be preserved. It says agencies should not hide behind vague language. It says public trust requires more than reassurance. It says strange events deserve serious analysis. It also says the most dramatic explanation must earn its place. This is a harder position than simply believing or dismissing. It refuses both pleasures. Belief gives the pleasure of revelation. Dismissal gives the pleasure of superiority. Careful uncertainty gives neither. Careful uncertainty says, this may matter, but not for the reason you want. This may be unresolved, but not extraordinary. This witness may be credible, but not sufficient. This video may be real, but not interpretable. This file may be authentic, but not decisive. That is emotionally unsatisfying. It is also intellectually honest. The public has been conditioned to treat mystery as if it has weight by itself. One strange video, one pilot report, one hearing, one redacted file, one former official, one unexplained track, one old case. Each item may be weak alone, but together they begin to feel heavy. People say there is too much smoke for no fire, but science does not weigh mystery that way. A pile of weak cases does not automatically become a strong case. Each claim has to survive analysis. Each piece has to be examined for quality. 100 blurry dots do not equal one clear object. 100 unresolved reports do not equal one verified craft. 100 suspicions do not equal one material sample with a clean chain of custody. Quality can create pressure. Quality creates proof. That distinction is brutal because the public archive is often rich in quantity and poor in quality. There may be many reports, many pages, many clips, many accounts, but the crucial details are often missing. Range, time, sensor settings, raw file, environmental context, multi-sensor correlation, independent review, investigative history. Without those, the archive becomes a landscape of partial shadows. The human mind is excellent at turning shadows into shapes. That is why the alien face appears so easily. A few lines in the dark and the mind supplies eyes. A noise pattern and the mind supplies intention. A strange light and the mind supplies a craft. A government silence and the mind supplies a secret. This is not stupidity. It is pattern making. Human beings are built to interpret incomplete information. That ability keeps us alive. It also makes us vulnerable to overinterpretation. We see agency where there may be accident. We see design where there may be artifact. We see motion where there may be perspective. We see hidden story where there may be administrative confusion. The UAP problem lives in that vulnerability. It sits between perception and proof. The strongest documentaries about this subject should not pretend the public is foolish. The public response is rooted in real emotional history. People have been misled by institutions. People have watched governments hide programs. People know that official language can be evasive. People feel that experts sometimes dismiss what ordinary observers experience. People want to believe that reality is bigger than official categories. Those feelings deserve respect. But feelings cannot identify objects. The files did not fail because people cared. They failed to prove aliens because caring is not enough. Suspicion is not enough. Wonder is not enough. A witness account is not enough. A clip is not enough. A stamp is not enough. Even a hearing is not enough. The alien claim requires evidence that can survive hostile examination. It requires material, or data, or repeated measurement, or independent confirmation. Strong enough to rule out known human, natural, and instrumental explanations. It requires a chain that does not break at the exact point where the claim becomes extraordinary. It requires more than the statement that something was not identified. That evidence has not appeared in the public record. The absence hurts because the expectation was so large. For years, the public was told, directly or indirectly, that disclosure was near. Some figures suggested that hidden programs existed. Some hinted at retrieved objects. Some spoke of non-human intelligence. Some framed the issue as a battle between transparency and secrecy. The cultural machinery around UAP became saturated with the idea that the truth was being held back, not that the evidence itself was thin. So when files opened and did not deliver proof, disappointment became almost unbearable. Many people could not accept that the released material was weak. It felt more natural to believe the real proof was still hidden. That may be possible in some general sense. Governments can withhold material. But possibility is not evidence. The claim that decisive proof remains concealed must still be supported by more than the disappointment created by a weak release. Otherwise, every failed prediction becomes evidence for the next prediction. The belief becomes unfalsifiable. That is dangerous because it means reality no longer disciplines the story. If files prove aliens, believers win. If files do not prove aliens, the real files are hidden, so believers still win. If officials deny alien evidence, the denial proves the cover-up. If officials release weak material, the weakness proves they are withholding stronger material. Every outcome feeds the same conclusion. That is not investigation, it is a closed loop. A serious inquiry must allow claims to fail. If a release does not prove aliens, the responsible conclusion is not automatically that better proof is hidden. The responsible conclusion is that this release does not prove aliens. Other claims may be investigated separately. Other evidence may emerge, but the specific material must be judged by what it contains, not by what people hoped it would contain. That is how evidence works. It stays local. This file, this clip, this witness, this sensor, this report, this missing data. The grand question must be built from small answers, not imposed upon them. The problem is that small answers do not satisfy a culture trained on revelation. A case resolved as a balloon feels insulting. A case resolved as a satellite feels anticlimactic. A case attributed to parallax feels like a technical trick. A case left unresolved because of missing data feels like a cheat. People want the mystery to scale up, not down. But many real investigations scale down. They take the cosmic and return it to the ordinary. They take the impossible motion and find camera geometry. They take the glowing orb and find thermal glare. They take the fleet of lights and find satellites. They take the metallic sphere and find a balloon. They take the dramatic narrative and find incomplete data. That can feel like a loss. It is not being robbed of a false miracle is not a loss. It is a correction. The subject needs correction because it has been overfed with drama. A dark hearing room, a red stamp, a blurred shape, a fighter pilot, a hidden program, a former official, a blacked-out page. These are powerful images. They are made for the imagination. They make the mundane feel radioactive. But a powerful image is not a powerful case. A case becomes powerful when its evidence is strong enough that ordinary explanations fail under scrutiny. Not because people dislike those explanations, but because the data rule them out. A case becomes powerful when multiple independent systems agree, when range and motion are known, when raw data exist, when experts can examine the record, when claims can be tested. Most public UAP material does not live at that level. It lives in the weaker zone of fragments. Fragments matter, but they are not enough for the strongest conclusion. The scientific approach to this problem is not exciting in the way UFO culture wants it to be. It asks for better data, calibrated sensors, metadata, standard reporting, and scientific methodology. That language does not sound like revelation, it sounds like paperwork and engineering. But that is what a real path forward looks like. If UAP are to be studied scientifically, they cannot remain a mythology of clips. They need instruments designed for the question. They need multiple sensors looking at the same event. They need time, location, atmospheric conditions, camera characteristics, and sensor modes preserved from the beginning. They need data that can be shared and reviewed. They need hypotheses that can be tested. They need cases that can be compared. That would make the subject less theatrical. It would also make it more real. A serious archive would not merely show a few seconds of footage and ask the public to wonder. It would show the context. It would explain what the object might have been. It would say what was ruled out. It would describe what data are missing. It would distinguish between cases that remain interesting and cases that are simply underdetermined. It would not let unresolved become a marketing word. The public deserves that. Witnesses deserve that. Science requires that. Without it, the files will remain fuel for argument rather than knowledge. The public should not be forced to choose between blind trust and conspiracy. That is a false choice. A person can distrust vague official statements and still reject unsupported alien claims. A person can demand more records and still admit that released records are weak. A person can support transparency and still refuse to let unknown become extraterrestrial. That middle position is where a mature culture would stand. It is not passive. It does not say the subject is worthless. It demands more, not less. More data, more clarity, more scientific standards, more accountability, more protection for witnesses, more honesty about uncertainty, more separation between safety issues and cosmic speculation. It also demands more from the public, less projection, less certainty, less treating every gap as a secret, less turning every unresolved case into a spacecraft, less confusing distrust with proof, less rewarding claims that grow larger as evidence gets thinner. The files did not prove aliens because proof cannot be replaced by atmosphere. That is the lesson. Atmosphere is what UFO culture has in abundance. Dim rooms, red lights, desert bases, classified folders, silent officials, leaked clips, military voices, black triangles, silver disks, glowing orbs, blurred ocean footage, static, signal loss, whispers about retrievals, rumors about hidden materials. Atmosphere can make a story unforgettable. But atmosphere cannot tell you what an object was. The scientific question remains stubbornly plain. What was observed? How was it observed? What data exist? What explanations fit? What explanations fail? What can be known, and what must remain uncertain? That plainness is the antidote to hysteria. It is also the thing that makes the public impatient. People do not want a careful distinction between observation and interpretation. They want the answer. They want the locked door to open. They want the sky to confess. They want the files to justify the decades of suspicion. They want the government to say the thing directly. But reality is not obligated to reward expectation. The files opened, and the evidence remained fragile. That fragility is the story we need to tell. A released UAP file is not automatically a strong UAP case. It may be a historical document. It may be a report from a witness. It may be a sensor clip. It may be a summary. It may be a record of an event no one could identify at the time. It may be interesting. It may be worth preserving. But the scientific question is not whether it exists. The question is what it supports. Many files support a simple claim. Something was reported. Some support a stronger claim. Something was observed or recorded. Fewer support a much stronger claim. Something remains unexplained after careful analysis. Almost none support the claim people most want. Alien technology. The distance between those claims is enormous. The public often collapses that distance because the subject is emotionally loaded. When people hear that something was reported, they imagine it was observed clearly. When they hear it was observed, they imagine it was anomalous. When they hear it was anomalous, they imagine it was technological. When they hear technological, they imagine non-human. When they hear non-human, they imagine decades of government deception. But each step requires evidence. If the steps are skipped, the story becomes a staircase built out of air. This is why language matters. UFO used to carry cultural baggage so heavy that almost any discussion began with ridicule or belief. UAP was supposed to provide cleaner language. It sounds more technical, less comic, less tied to saucers and little green men. It gives officials and researchers a way to discuss reports without invoking old mythology. But changing the label did not erase the expectation. Many people simply moved the alien story into the new acronym. UAP became a more serious container for the same old hope. That hope is not hard to understand. The idea that we are not alone is emotionally overwhelming. The idea that the government knows and has hidden it is even more powerful because it gives the seismic question a human villain. It turns the unknown universe into a political drama. It says the truth is not unreachable, it is being withheld. That is a more comforting story than it appears. If the truth is hidden, then someone has it. If someone has it, then it can be forced into the open. If it can be forced into the open, then disclosure is only a matter of pressure. The alternative is colder. Maybe no one has the clean answer. Maybe many cases are unresolved because the data are too poor. Maybe the files are not a vault of alien proof, but a record of confusion. Maybe the system did not hide the answer so much as fail to collect enough information to produce one. That possibility is less cinematic. It is also more disturbing. A cover-up implies control. Bad data imply limits. People prefer control, even sinister control, to limits. A hidden program can be exposed. A secret hangar can be found. A lying official can be cornered. But missing metadata cannot be recovered by outrage. A lost raw file cannot be reconstructed by belief. A witness's memory cannot become a measurement, because the public wants closure. Some uncertainties cannot be solved after the fact. That is why collection matters so much. The most important moment in a UAP case may not be when the public sees the clip. It may be the moment the censor collected, or failed to collect, the right information. It may be the moment the raw file was preserved or lost. It may be the moment a witness wrote down details, or waited too long. It may be the moment a report was standardized or buried in a vague form. It may be the moment metadata existed or vanished. Proof is not only discovered, it is built by good collection, before anyone knows whether the case will matter. If the collection is poor, later drama cannot repair it. This is why the public archive can feel like an emotional trap. The files are open enough to create excitement, but not strong enough to close the argument. They reveal enough to make people suspicious, but not enough to satisfy scientific standards. They carry official weight, but often lack the details that would allow independent analysis. They are transparent enough to ignite debate, but incomplete enough to preserve mystery. That is not disclosure in the heroic sense. It is partial visibility. Partial visibility can be worse than darkness because it lets people imagine they have seen the shape of something when they have only seen its shadow. The alien narrative thrives in shadow. It does not require a clean object. It requires suggestive absence. It requires enough outline to trigger recognition and enough missing detail to prevent resolution. That is why blurred footage, redacted files, and second-hand claims are so durable. They cannot prove the story, but they can keep it alive. A true scientific breakthrough would be different. It would not depend on interpretive fog. It would sharpen under scrutiny. It would become clearer as more people examined it. It would not need the viewer to believe that missing evidence is hidden. It would produce data that hostile experts could test. It would make the ordinary explanations fail, not because they are emotionally unsatisfying, but because they no longer fit. That is the threshold the alien claim has not crossed. The files did not cross it. The hearings did not cross it. The clips did not cross it. That is not an argument that nothing unusual ever happens. It is an argument that the strongest conclusion has not been earned. This distinction matters for witnesses. If the public rushes to aliens, witnesses become symbols instead of observers. A pilot who saw something strange is turned into a messenger from a hidden reality. A service member who reports a sensor event becomes a character in a myth. Their actual experience, with all its limits and uncertainty, is swallowed by the story people want. Respecting witnesses means protecting the difference between report and interpretation. It means saying, you may have seen something real, and we still need to know what the data can support. It means taking the report seriously, without forcing it into the most dramatic frame. It means building systems where people can report without stigma, and where their reports are investigated with discipline rather than ridicule or worship. Mockery is lazy, mythology is also lazy. Both avoid the difficult work. The difficult work asks what happened without deciding too early what it means. That work is especially hard when the surrounding culture is hungry for a cosmic answer. The hunger is real. It comes from more than curiosity. It comes from loneliness. It comes from distrust. It comes from the desire to discover that ordinary history is not the whole story. It comes from the hope that humanity is being watched, challenged, threatened, or invited by something beyond itself. The alien answer is not only a scientific claim. It is an emotional event. It says we are not alone. It says the universe has noticed us. It says the silence was not empty. It says the hidden truth was worth the waiting. It says ridicule was wrong. It says the strange feeling many people carried for years was justified. That is why weak evidence can feel unbearable to abandon. Abandoning it feels like losing more than a case. It feels like losing a possible world. But science cannot protect a possible world simply because people need it. It has to ask what the world has shown. It has to ask whether the evidence is strong enough to force belief from someone who does not want to believe. That is the standard that matters. Proof does not ask the audience to be generous. It survives skepticism. The released files do not survive that way as alien proof. They may survive as evidence of reports. They may survive as evidence of institutional confusion. They may survive as evidence of airspace concerns. They may survive as evidence that data collection was inadequate. They may survive as evidence that public communication needs repair. But alien technology requires a different level of survival. It requires the evidence to do more than remain mysterious. A mystery is not a conclusion. A mystery is the place where conclusions are tested. The failure to remember that has distorted the entire UAP conversation. People treat the unknown as if it points in a preferred direction. It does not. The unknown is not a compass. It does not lean toward aliens because aliens are exciting. It does not lean toward secret aircraft because secret aircraft are plausible. It does not lean toward drones because drones are common. It waits for evidence. The honest answer to many cases is uncomfortable. We do not know. And we may never know, because the data are not good enough. That answer feels like weakness in public debate. In science, it can be strength. It prevents false certainty. It protects the boundary between evidence and desire. It allows future cases to be studied better. It admits that not every question can be solved from the fragments left behind. The modern public sphere hates that kind of answer because it is not emotionally complete. People want resolution. They want the strange object to become something. Alien craft, drone, balloon, sensor artifact. They want the story to stop moving. But some stories stop only when the evidence runs out. That is where many UAP cases end, not with a solution, with a limit. The mature response is not to pretend the limit is a spacecraft. The mature response is to learn from the limit. Why was the data insufficient? Why was the raw footage not available? Why was range not established? Why were systems not correlated? Why did reporting channels fail? Why was the public given a clip without enough context? Why did the official language allow misunderstanding? Why did media coverage amplify the most dramatic interpretation? Why did the audience want the alien conclusion so badly? Those questions lead somewhere useful. They lead toward better systems. They lead toward better reporting. They lead toward better public understanding. They lead away from the endless loop of almost proof. The tragedy of the UFO files is that they arrived inside a culture that had already written their ending. Before many people read them, they knew what they wanted the files to mean. That is not unusual. Human beings do this constantly. We do not meet evidence empty-handed. We bring expectations, fears, identities, communities, old injuries, and hopes. In UAP culture, the hope is enormous. It is the hope that the universe is not silent. The fear is also enormous. It is the fear that institutions have lied about the most important fact in human history. Put those together, and every file becomes charged before anyone reads it. That charge can make weak evidence glow. The job of a serious documentary voice is to dim the glow enough to see the object. Not to kill the feeling, but to separate feeling from proof. Not to laugh at wonder, but to protect wonder from being wasted on bad evidence. Not to claim the mystery is fake, but to insist that the mystery remain honest. The honest mystery is more interesting than the false revelation. The false revelation says the answer is already here, hidden only by cowards and liars. The honest mystery says we are looking at a collision between limited sensors, human perception, military secrecy, public distrust, media pressure, and a cosmic longing that may be larger than the evidence can bear. That is a better story because it is true to the mess, the hearing room, the cockpit, the radar screen, the redacted file, the dark sky, the static-filled clip. None of them has to be thrown away. They belong in the story. But they do not point automatically to one conclusion. They point to a problem in how we know things, under uncertainty. That is the deeper scientific story, not whether aliens are impossible, whether the evidence in these cases is capable of supporting that conclusion. So far, it is not. That sentence should be spoken without triumph. It is not a victory for skeptics, it is not a humiliation of witnesses. It is not a reason for institutions to become arrogant. It is not permission to ignore unknown objects near military areas. It is not the end of curiosity. It is a boundary. Boundaries matter. Without them, every strange thing becomes whatever the audience needs it to be. A light becomes a craft. A craft becomes a visitor becomes a civilization becomes a secret becomes a worldview. Once a worldview forms, evidence becomes secondary. That is how mysteries become religions without admitting it. A scientific culture has to resist that transformation. It has to let some cases remain unresolved without turning them into icons. It has to let some witnesses remain uncertain without turning them into prophets. It has to let some files remain incomplete without turning incompleteness into proof. The public may not like that. But if the truth matters, the public has to tolerate it. The files did not prove aliens because the proof is not in the performance of disclosure. It is not in the page becoming public. It is not in the word UAP. It is not in the seriousness of the room. It is not in the fact that officials now discuss the subject more openly than before. Those things matter culturally. They do not establish origin. Origin is a harder claim. To say an object came from non-human technology, a case must do more than resist easy identification. It must show characteristics that survive measurement. It must rule out known human systems, natural phenomena, and instrument effects, with enough confidence to make the extraordinary claim necessary. It must be open to independent scrutiny where possible. It must be supported by evidence that does not evaporate when range, angle, compression, or sensor behavior is examined. That is a high bar. It should be. The greatest discoveries demand the strongest foundations. The frustration is that many people believe the bar is being used to avoid the truth. They say skeptics will never be satisfied. They say every case is explained away. They say if a video is blurry, skeptics dismiss it. If a witness is credible, skeptics demand material. If material is claimed, skeptics demand chain of custody. If records are classified, skeptics say they cannot evaluate them. To believers, it feels like the goal keeps moving. But the goal is not moving. The claim is enormous. The evidence must be enormous enough to carry it. A person claiming a strange light does not need to prove another civilization. A person claiming alien technology does. That is not unfair, that is proportional. If a claim rewrites history, it must survive history. The UFO files did not survive at that level, they survived as something else. A warning about how easily uncertainty can be inflated. They show how a public primed for revelation can turn incomplete records into emotional proof. They show how official secrecy, even when motivated by ordinary security concerns, can poison trust. They show how weak data can be more culturally durable than strong explanations. They show how difficult it is to communicate uncertainty in a society addicted to certainty. They also show that the sky is now crowded enough to make misidentification easier than ever. The old UFO mythology came from an age when people imagined the sky as mostly empty. Stars, aircraft, weather, maybe a balloon. The modern sky is not that sky. It contains drones, satellite constellations, private launch debris, high-altitude balloons, military exercises, classified platforms, research aircraft, commercial traffic, atmospheric effects, and sensor artifacts. Ordinary people are not trained to recognize all of it. Even trained people may not recognize all of it under unusual conditions. A new human object can look alien before the culture learns its shape. Satellite trains are a perfect example. To someone seeing them unexpectedly, a line of lights moving across the sky can feel impossible. It can look organized, silent, deliberate. For a moment, the viewer may genuinely experience awe, fear, and confusion. The explanation may be ordinary, but the experience was real. That is important. The feeling of strangeness is real even when the interpretation is wrong. UAP cases often live in that gap. Something looks wrong. The viewer reacts honestly. A report is made. The event becomes part of the archive. Later, analysts may find a prosaic explanation, or they may not have enough data to do so. The original feeling remains powerful, and power can be mistaken for accuracy. Mirror adds another layer. A witness may recall an event with sincerity, but memory is not a recording. It changes under stress, under repetition, under public attention, under the influence of later information. A person who saw something strange may gradually connect it to a broader story. The object becomes clearer in meaning, even if it was not clearer in perception. That is not lying. It is how human memory and narrative interact. A serious investigation must be compassionate enough to understand this and strict enough not to confuse it with measurement. The strictness is where many viewers feel the tone become cold. They want the witness honored, they want the fear respected, they want the strange moment to stay strange. But respecting a witness does not mean freezing the witness's interpretation as truth. It means treating the report as a starting point, and building a better record around it. That is how aviation safety works. That is how science works. That is how serious inquiry works. The tragedy is that the UFO topic spent so long in the cultural wilderness that seriousness itself now feels like confirmation. Once lawmakers hold hearings and agencies create offices and reports, use formal language, many people feel the old taboo has broken and the alien answer must be near. But seriousness about a subject is not the same as confirmation of the most extreme claim attached to it. Aviation safety is serious, drone incursions are serious, sensor anomalies are serious, misidentification patterns are serious. Classification failures are esters, public distrust is serious. None of these requires alien spacecraft. The subject can be serious without being extraterrestrial. That may be the hardest sentence for the audience to accept, because it withholds the emotional reward. It says yes, the issue matters. No, not necessarily in the way you hope. It says the government should be more transparent. No, that does not mean the hidden truth is aliens. It says witnesses should be treated better. No, that does not make every interpretation correct. It says the files are worth reading. No, they do not deliver the proof. The disappointment remains. But disappointment can become clarity if people let it. The files are a disappointment only if the goal was alien confirmation. If the goal is understanding how modern societies handle uncertainty, they are fascinating. They reveal a system struggling to translate strange reports into official categories. They reveal the mismatch between public expectation and evidentiary standards. They reveal how much depends on data that was never collected properly. They reveal how secrecy turns ordinary ambiguity into suspicion. They reveal that public belief can outrun the record faster than any aircraft. That is why every new release should be approached with a different question. Not what do we want this to prove? What can this actually support? Not what does the title suggest? What do the data show? Not why is this still unresolved? What information is missing? Not could it be aliens? What would have to be true for that claim to become necessary? That last question changes everything. It forces the alien claim to become specific. What measurable feature requires non-human technology? Was acceleration directly measured? Was there a known range? Was there material recovered? Was there independent confirmation? Were known objects ruled out? Were sensor artifacts ruled out? Were ordinary human platforms ruled out? Was the data preserved in a way that allows others to test the conclusion? If the answer is no, the alien claim remains an idea placed on top of uncertainty. That does not mean the idea is impossible, it means the case has not earned it. The distinction between impossible and unproven is crucial. Skepticism does not need to claim aliens cannot exist. It does not need to claim no advanced civilization is possible. It does not need to claim every human witness is wrong. It only needs to say the available evidence does not support the conclusion. That is a modest statement. In a heated culture, it sounds radical. Because the emotional temperature around UAP is so high, modest statements are treated like attacks. This does not prove aliens becomes, you are saying nothing happened. The data are weak becomes, you are calling the witness a liar. This might be a drone becomes, you are covering for the government. Unidentified does not mean extraterrestrial, becomes, you refuse to believe. The conversation collapses because people hear the loss of their preferred conclusion as the loss of the entire event, but the event can remain real without the preferred conclusion. Something may have happened, the file may matter, the witness may be sincere, the sensor may have recorded a genuine anomaly, and aliens may still be unproven. That layered answer is difficult, but it is the only one that fits many cases. A mature public has to learn to hold layers. The archive should be read as a map of uncertainty, not a vault of revelation. Some entries may be mundane, some may be poorly documented, some may be interesting, some may reflect new technology, some may reflect adversarial systems, some may reflect reporting errors, some may never be resolved. The archive is not one story. It is a collection of fragments gathered under pressure. The mistake is turning the whole archive into a single myth. That myth says the files are all pointing toward the same hidden truth. The stronger possibility is messier. The files point toward different problems, some about perception, some about sensors, some about airspace, some about bureaucracy, some about secrecy, some about public hunger, some about cases too weak to solve. The myth is cleaner, the mess is more believable. This matters because future releases will continue to be misunderstood if the public does not change its expectations. More documents may appear, more videos may be released, more witnesses may speak, more hearings may be held. Each new piece will arrive inside the same emotional machinery. If the public still treats unresolved as alien adjacent, the cycle will continue. Excitement, speak, weak, disappointment, suspicions, demand for the next release. The cycle can run forever because it does not require proof. It requires anticipation. Breaking the cycle requires a different kind of satisfaction. The satisfaction of understanding why a case is weak. The satisfaction of seeing a prosaic explanation work. The satisfaction of knowing which cases are worth deeper attention. The The satisfaction of distinguishing between a national security issue and a cosmic one. The satisfaction of resisting a false conclusion because the truth matters more than the thrill. That is not as easy to sell, but it is more durable. The strongest version of curiosity is not the one that believes fastest. It is the one that keeps asking after the drama fades. It asks why pilots report. It asks how sensors fail. It asks how files are classified. It asks how public trust breaks. It asks how stories form around incomplete evidence. It asks how science can study rare, unpredictable events without letting folklore take control. Those questions are quieter than, "Are aliens here?" They are also questions that can be answered. The alien question may one day be answered by astronomy, by biology, by a signal, by a probe, by a discovery beyond Earth, or by evidence stronger than anything now in public UAP files. But a question that large cannot be answered cheaply. It cannot be answered by vibes from a hearing room. It cannot be answered by a short clip with unknown range. It cannot be answered by the feeling that the government seems nervous. It requires the kind of evidence that does not need a friendly audience. That evidence would change everything. The current files do not. That is the disappointment. The scene should be almost silent when that truth lands. No dramatic reveal. No spacecraft doors opening. No official stepping to a podium to announce contact. Just a desk under cold light, a folder open, a few black bars across a page, a low-resolution image, a clipped sensor recording, a paragraph of cautious language. Enough to keep the public staring. Not enough to prove the claim. That silence is more honest than the music people want. It tells us that proof is not hidden in the feeling of importance. It must be present in the evidence itself. The files may still hide things. They almost certainly hide context in places. They may hide capabilities, names, procedures, systems, mistakes, or details agencies prefer not to share. But the most disappointing thing is not what remains hidden. The most disappointing thing is that the visible material still does not carry the alien claim. What we can see is not enough. What we cannot see cannot be treated as proof. That is the trap. People want to use the hidden material to rescue the visible weakness. The released evidence is thin, so the decisive evidence must still be classified. The clip is ambiguous, so the full version must be shocking. The witness is indirect, so the direct witness must be silent. The report is incomplete, so the complete report must be explosive. Maybe there are withheld details. Maybe some would matter. But until they are available, they cannot do the work of evidence in public. A claim cannot borrow strength from invisible proof. That is not skepticism being unfair, that is logic. The public can demand the proof be released. It cannot act as if the proof has already been released. This is where the UFO files force a moral discipline on everyone who cares about the subject. Believers must stop treating absence as confirmation. Skeptics must stop treating interest as stupidity. Agencies must stop treating vague reassurance as transparency. Journalists must stop turning uncertainty into spectacle. Scientists must not dismiss the data problem simply because the culture around it is noisy. The subject deserves better than all of them have often given it. It deserves seriousness without mythology. It deserves skepticism without contempt. It deserves transparency without theater. It deserves wonder without surrender. The phrase unidentified does not mean extraterrestrial should be repeated until it loses its power to disappoint. Not because it is the end of curiosity, but because it is the beginning of honest curiosity. Once that boundary is clear, the real questions become sharper. What kinds of objects are being misidentified? Which sensor systems produce the most ambiguous results? How often do reports correlate across independent systems? What kinds of airspace events are security risks? How should pilots report without stigma? What data should be collected automatically? How can classified context be protected without making public analysis impossible? Which cases remain interesting after ordinary explanations are tested? Those questions build knowledge, the alien shortcut builds expectation. Expectation is not knowledge, the modern UAP file release is therefore not a failed story. It is a story that failed to become the one wanted. That failure is revealing. It shows that the public hunger for alien proof is so strong that even weak evidence can be pulled toward it. It shows that institutions damage trust so badly that cautious language now sounds like concealment. It shows that scientific standards feel almost offensive when people have waited so long for a revelation. But waiting does not lower the burden of proof, it only increases the emotional cost of not meeting it. The longer people wait for disclosure, the more each week release feels unbearable. The archive becomes a test not only of evidence, but of identity. People who have defended the subject for years may feel they need the files to justify their persistence. People who mocked the subject may feel they need weakness to justify their dismissal. The material itself gets pulled between pride and embarrassment, truth gets lost in the social pressure. A strong scientific culture would reduce that pressure by making uncertainty normal. It would allow people to say, with no shame, that a case is unresolved, but not extraordinary. It would allow witnesses to report without being turned into alien evidence. It would allow skeptics to investigate without sneering. It would allow agencies to admit ignorance without sounding evasive. That culture does not yet exist. The UAP debate is still too theatrical, it still wants villains and revelations. It still turns every file into a battle over belief, but the files themselves are quieter than the battle. They do not scream aliens. They do not deliver the clean rupture. They sit there with their missing pieces and cautious phrasing. They ask for analysis. They resist the weight placed on them. In that resistance, there is a lesson. The unknown is not an answer, it is a demand for better seeing, better recording, better thinking, better institutions, better public patience. If we answer that demand with mythology, we lose the chance to learn. If we answer it with contempt, we also lose. The subject has to be pulled away from both extremes and placed where difficult questions belong. Under good light, with careful methods, with enough humility to admit that some mysteries are not messages. Some are gaps, some are errors, some are lost opportunities, some are real problems that need better tools. And maybe, someday a small number could become something more. But that day cannot be declared by wish, it has to be forced by evidence. The files did not force it, that is the line. The public may continue to ask what the government knows. It should. It may continue to ask why material remains classified. It should. It may continue to demand better reporting systems and more serious study. It should. But it should also ask itself why it wanted the alien answer so intensely, that it was ready to mistake incomplete evidence for revelation. That self-question may be the hardest one. Because the UFO story is not only about the government, it is about us. It is about how badly we want the universe to interrupt the ordinary. It is about how quickly we turn uncertainty into a plot. It is about how much we prefer a hidden truth to an incomplete record. It is about how difficult it is to accept that the world can be strange without being cinematic. The sky does not owe us a story. The files do not owe us the ending we imagined. Proof does not become stronger because we are tired of waiting. Somewhere tonight, someone will look up and see a light they cannot explain. For a moment, the old feeling will return. The body will react before the mind organizes the scene. The world will feel larger, stranger, less settled. That feeling matters. It is one of the reasons human beings explore, question, build instruments, study stars, and refuse to let the unknown remain untouched. But the next move matters. The next move is not to force the light into the alien story. The next move is to ask what was seen, how it was seen, what can be recorded, what can be checked, what can be ruled out, and what remains. That is how wonder becomes knowledge. The UFO files did not prove aliens. They proved that wonder without evidence is not enough. They proved that secrecy can make weak data look powerful. They proved that the public still confuses unidentified with extraordinary. They proved that science has to be slower than belief. They proved that a mystery can be real and still not be the mystery people want. And in a strange way, that may be the most important revelation they could have offered. Not because it ends the question, because it makes the question honest again.